The wooden coffin hit the ground with a dull thud, echoing in Tessa Keating's hollow chest as she stood alone at the edge of the freshly dug grave in Ardmore, Oklahoma's windswept cemetery. The year was 1878, and at 24 years old, she had just buried her father, the last person on earth who had loved her, the final thread connecting her to anything resembling hope. "Miss Keating," the undertaker spoke softly behind her, his voice barely audible above the prairie wind. "We should be heading back now. Storm's coming." Tessa nodded without turning, her eyes fixed on the simple pine box. James Keating had been a decent man, a struggling shopkeeper who'd raised her alone after her mother died of fever when Tessa was just 8. Now consumption had taken him too, leaving her with nothing but debts, a failing general store, and the crushing weight of complete isolation in a town that had never truly welcomed them. "I'll be along shortly," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tears threatening to spill. The undertaker hesitated before nodding and walking away, leaving Tessa truly alone with her thoughts. The dark clouds gathering on the horizon matched her mood perfectly. She had given up on everything, dreams of love, of prosperity, of building a life worth living. Ardmore had seemed promising when they'd arrived 3 years prior, but the town had proven unforgiving. The drought had crushed local farmers, leaving little money for purchasing goods from her father's store. The railroad had bypassed them for a route 20 miles south, taking with it any chance of meaningful growth. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Tessa finally turned away. Her black mourning dress whipped around her ankles as the wind picked up, and she walked the lonely path back to town, her steps heavy with grief and resignation. By the time she reached Main Street, the rain was falling in earnest. Tessa hurried past the saloon, ignoring the raucous laughter spilling from its swinging doors. She kept her eyes forward as she passed the bank, knowing Mr. Simmons would be looking for her soon to discuss her father's outstanding loans. The thought made her stomach clench with dread. The sign above her father's store, Keating's General Goods, swung precariously in the wind, one hinge nearly rusted through. Inside, the shelves were half empty, dust gathering on what little inventory remained. Tessa locked the door behind her, leaned against it, and finally allowed herself to weep. The sound of her sobs filled the empty store, echoing off the bare walls and shelves. She slid to the floor, her black dress pooling around her as she buried her face in her hands. How would she survive? What was there left to live for? The debts alone would consume what little remained of the business. She had no family, no prospects, and no hope. Morning came with harsh sunlight streaming through the store's grimy windows. Tessa had fallen asleep on her father's cot in the back room, still wearing her mourning dress. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her throat raw. She pushed herself up and mechanically began her morning routine, washing her face in the basin and changing into a simple brown dress. The knock at the front door came just as she was pinning up her hair. Tessa froze, knowing it could only be bad news. Another knock, more insistent this time. With a deep breath, she made her way to the door, steeling herself for the inevitable confrontation with the bank manager. Instead, she found Sheriff Miller, hat in hand, his weathered face tight with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Miss Keating," he nodded respectfully. "I'm sorry about your father. Jim was a good man." "Thank you, Sheriff," Tessa replied automatically, though the platitude felt empty. "What can I do for you?" the sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "I'm here about the store, Miss Keating. Mr. Simmons from the bank asked me to deliver this." He held out an official-looking envelope. Tessa took it, knowing what it contained without opening it. "How long do I have?" 2 weeks, Sheriff Miller said, his voice apologetic. "I tried to talk him into giving you more time, but business is business," Tessa finished for him, a bitter taste in her mouth. "Thank you for delivering it personally." The sheriff nodded, replaced his hat, and turned to leave before pausing. "There's a cattle drive coming through next week. Might bring some business your way before." He left the sentence unfinished. Tessa closed the door, leaned her forehead against it, and closed her eyes. 2 weeks. In 14 days, she would lose everything, not that there was much left to lose. She spent the morning taking inventory of what remained in the store. The tally was depressing. There wasn't enough merchandise to pay even a quarter of what they owed the bank. She would have to sell her father's pocket watch, her mother's silver hairbrush, the only items of value she possessed. And even then, it wouldn't be enough. By midday, she had reopened the store out of habit more than hope. A few townsfolk came by, mostly to offer condolences rather than to purchase anything. Mrs. Henderson bought some thread, Mr. Peterson a tin of tobacco. Their eyes held pity, which was almost worse than the cold indifference Tessa had grown accustomed to in Ardmore. As the afternoon dragged on, the bell above the door jingled, and Tessa looked up from her ledger to see Olivia Marsh, the mayor's daughter, standing in the doorway with her usual air of superiority. "I heard about your father," Olivia said, making no move to approach the counter. "Such a shame." "Thank you," Tessa replied stiffly, knowing full well that Olivia had never had a kind word for either of them while her father was alive. "I suppose you'll be leaving town now." It was more statement than question, delivered with a thin veneer of concern that didn't reach Olivia's eyes. "I haven't decided yet," Tessa answered, though in truth she had nowhere to go. Olivia wandered around the store, picking up items and setting them down with a dismissive gesture. "Well, if you need any help with packing or selling what's left, do let me know. Father says the building would make a fine addition to his properties once the bank takes it." The casual cruelty of the comment stole Tessa's breath for a moment. "Was there something specific you were looking to buy today, Miss Marsh?" she managed to ask through gritted teeth. Olivia smiled, a sharp thing with no warmth. "Not today, thank you. I just wanted to pay my respects." With that, she swept out of the store, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the sting of humiliation. Tessa closed early that day, unable to bear the thought of more such encounters. She sat in the darkening store, a single lamp casting long shadows, and contemplated her options. She could try to find work as a seamstress or laundress, though such positions were scarce in Ardmore. She could seek employment at the hotel, though the thought of cleaning rooms for people like the Marshes made her stomach turn. Or she could leave, but where would she go? How would she get there with no money? The following days passed in a blur of mounting despair. Few customers came to the store, and those who did spent little. Tessa sold her father's watch to Mr. Holloway at the pawnshop for far less than it was worth, but necessity left no room for pride. The money would buy her food for a few weeks, nothing more. 5 days after her father's funeral, the cattle drive Sheriff Miller had mentioned arrived on the outskirts of town. From her position behind the counter, Tessa could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the shouts of men. Normally, such an event would bring a flush of business to the store, but with their depleted inventory, she held little hope. The bell above the door jingled mid-afternoon, pulling Tessa from her grim calculations. She looked up to see a man she didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with dust coating his clothes and a week's worth of beard shadowing his jaw. A cowboy from the cattle drive, obviously, his hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice deep and graveled with trail dust. "You wouldn't happen to have any coffee, would you? Our cook ran out 2 days ago, and the boys are getting mighty testy." Tessa straightened, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance and the general disarray of the store. "Yes, I believe we have some left." She moved to the shelf where the coffee tins were kept, grateful to find 3 still in stock. "How much would you need?" the man considered, rubbing his jaw. "Better take all you've got. 20 men without coffee is a dangerous situation." For the first time in days, Tessa felt a flicker of something other than despair, the simple satisfaction of making a sale. That would be $2.25 for all 3 tins. The cowboy reached into his pocket and pulled out the money without hesitation. As Tessa wrapped the tins in paper, she noticed him looking around the store with a thoughtful expression. "Your shelves are looking a bit bare, if you don't mind my saying so," he observed, though his tone held no judgment. Tessa's hand stilled for a moment. "Yes, well. We've fallen on hard times." She didn't know why she was telling him this, a stranger passing through town who would be gone tomorrow, but the words spilled out anyway. "My father passed away last week. The bank is for closing in 9 days. The cowboy's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that, Miss Keating, Tessa Keating, Miss Keating," he nodded, taking the wrapped package from her. "I'm truly sorry for your loss, Thomas Hunter. Most folks call me Ty." Tessa nodded, expecting him to leave now that their transaction was complete. Instead, he lingered, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What will you do?" he asked finally. "After the bank takes the store," the blunt question caught her off guard. I haven't decided yet." Ty Hunter studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes seeing more than Tessa was comfortable revealing. "Our outfit could use some help with mending and cooking for the remainder of the drive to Kansas City. Pays fair, and you'd have protection on the trail." Tessa blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You're offering me a job, you don't even know me." A small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "I know you're in a tough spot, I know you're alone, and I know our cook's biscuits could kill a man if thrown hard enough." The smile widened briefly before fading into seriousness. "It's honest work, Miss Keating. 3 weeks on the trail, then you'd have enough money to make a fresh start somewhere." The offer was so unexpected, so completely outside anything Tessa had considered that she couldn't formulate a response. Leave Ardmore, join a cattle drive. The idea was preposterous, and yet, what exactly was keeping her here? "I'll need to think about it," she said finally. Ty nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "We'll be camped outside town for 2 more days, restocking and giving the cattle a chance to rest. If you decide you're interested, just ask for Hunter at the camp." He placed his hat back on his head and tipped it slightly. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Keating. Good day." With that, he was gone, leaving Tessa staring at the door in bewilderment. The brief interaction had left her oddly unsettled, like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward, disturbing the surface of her resignation. The rest of the day passed slowly. A few more cowboys from the cattle drive came in, purchasing tobacco and ammunition. Each sale provided a tiny spark of hope that perhaps she could salvage something, but Tessa knew the reality. These few sales were merely postponing the inevitable. That night, as she lay on her father's cot staring at the ceiling, Ty Hunter's offer played over and over in her mind. It was madness to consider it, a single woman joining a group of cowboys on a cattle drive. What would people say? But then again, what did it matter what people said? In 9 days, she would have nothing left in Ardmore but humiliation and pitying glances. Sleep eluded her as she weighed her options, what few there were. By dawn, she had made no decision but found herself more open to the idea than she would have believed possible. The next day brought more customers from the cattle drive, and Tessa found herself asking casual questions about the trail boss, Thomas Hunter. The responses were uniformly positive fare, tough but reasonable, respected by his men. It did little to quell her anxiety about the proposition, but it was something. As the afternoon waned, the bell above the door jingled again, and Tessa looked up to see Ty Hunter returning. He'd cleaned up since yesterday, shaved his beard to a neat mustache, changed into a clean shirt, though trail dust still clung to his boots and trousers. "Miss Keating," he nodded in greeting. "I find myself in need of a new bandana, red if you have it." Tessa moved to the nearly empty dry goods section. "I believe we have one left." She found it folded among the few remaining items and brought it to the counter. 15 cents, she said, noticing how his eyes moved around the store again, assessing. He paid but made no move to leave. "Have you given any thought to my offer?" Tessa hesitated, her hands smoothing the counter's worn surface. "I have, but I still have questions. It seems unusual for a cattle drive to hire a woman." Ty shrugged, tucking the bandana into his pocket. Not as unusual as you might think. Plenty of widows and single women work as cooks on drives. Our outfit's cook, old Pete, would welcome the help. His hands are getting too arthritic for mending, and none of the boys can sew worth a damn. He paused, studying her. It's hard work, and the trail's no place for delicate sensibilities, but you'd be treated with respect. And after Kansas City, what then? That would be your choice. The pay would give you options you don't have now. Tessa looked around the store, her father's dream, now a hollow shell of failure. What was she holding on to? Memories? Ghosts? The certainty of humiliation when the bank seized everything? When would you need an answer? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. We leave at dawn day after tomorrow. Ty's blue eyes held hers, neither pushing nor retreating. If you decide to join us, come to the camp tomorrow afternoon. Bring whatever you can carry, practical things. The trail's dusty and hard. Tessa nodded, still not committing, though something inside her had already made the decision. I'll think about it. Ty tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. Miss Keating, I know it's not my place to say so, but sometimes when you've given up on everything, all you need is a reason to start again. His eyes, surprisingly gentle for a man who lived a hard life, met hers. Sometimes that reason is just taking a chance. With that, he was gone, leaving Tessa standing behind the counter with her heart beating oddly fast. That evening, as Tessa closed the store, she made her decision. There was nothing left for her in Ardmore, nothing but debt and memories. The cattle drive offered something she hadn't had in years, possibility. It might be foolish, it might be scandalous, but it was a chance. She spent the night packing her meager possessions, 2 dresses, her mother's hairbrush, undergarments, a shawl, her sewing kit. She wrote a letter to Mr. Simmons at the bank, explaining that she was abandoning the store and its contents in lieu of the debt. It wasn't legal, perhaps, but it was the best she could offer. Morning came with a sense of finality. Tessa opened the store one last time, though she doubted any customers would come. She was proven wrong when Mrs. Henderson arrived looking for thread. I'm afraid I'm closing the store today, Tessa told her, the words strange on her tongue. For good, Mrs. Henderson's face fell. Oh, my dear. Where will you go? Tessa hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. I've accepted a position with a cattle outfit heading to Kansas City as a cook's assistant. The older woman's eyes widened in shock. A cattle drive, but that's no place for a young woman alone. What would your father say? The mention of her father stung, but Tessa lifted her chin. He would say that survival sometimes requires difficult choices, and he would understand that I have none left here, Mrs. Henderson shook her head in disapproval, but seemed to recognize the determination in Tessa's voice. Well, at least take these, she said, pulling 2 jars from her basket. Wild raspberry preserves might make the trail food more palatable. The unexpected kindness brought tears to Tessa's eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. The older woman patted her hand. You be careful out there, Tessa Keating, and come back to tell us all about it if you can. By noon, Tessa had closed the store for the final time. She stood on the boardwalk, her small bundle of possessions at her feet, looking at the building that had been her home and livelihood. It felt surreal to be leaving, yet also strangely liberating. The walk to the cattle camp took 20 minutes, each step carrying Tessa further from everything familiar and toward an uncertain future. The sprawling camp came into view, dozens of men moving about, horses corralled to one side, the massive herd of cattle grazing in the distance. The enormity of what she was doing hit her all at once, nearly stopping her in her tracks. A young cowboy spotted her first, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of a woman approaching camp. Can I help you, madam? Tessa straightened her shoulders. I'm looking for Mr. Hunter, Ty Hunter. The young man's eyebrows shot up, but he nodded. Yes, madam, this way. He led her through the camp, past curious stares and a few whispered comments, to a wagon where Ty Hunter stood examining what appeared to be a map with 2 other men. He looked up as they approached, surprise flickering across his face before settling into a pleased expression. "Miss Keating," he said, dismissing the other men with a nod. "You've made your decision, I see." "I have," Tessa confirmed, fighting the urge to fidget under his steady gaze. "If your offer still stands, I'd like to accept the position." Ty smiled, a genuine thing that transformed his weathered face and crinkled the corners of his eyes. "The offer stands," he gestured to her bundle. "Is that all you're bringing?" "It's all I have," she admitted. Something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps, or sympathy, though thankfully not pity. "It'll do. Come, let me introduce you to Pete. You'll be working mostly with him." Pete turned out to be a grizzled man of at least 60, with a shock of white hair and hands gnarled with arthritis, but sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked Tessa up and down with frank assessment. "You ever cooked for more than family, girl?" he asked, his voice rough as sandpaper. "I helped in my father's store since I was a child," Tessa replied. "I can follow instructions and I learn quickly," Pete snorted. "We'll see. Can you make biscuits that don't break teeth?" Despite her nerves, Tessa found herself smiling. "Yes, sir, and I can sew a straight seam as well." "Good." "My fingers ain't what they used to be." He jerked his head toward the chuck wagon. "You can stow your things under the wagon for now. We'll sort out sleeping arrangements later." As Tessa placed her bundle where directed, she was acutely aware of the stares from the cowboys around the camp. Ty noticed as well. "All right, you bunch of gawkers," he called out, his voice carrying authority without shouting. "This is Miss Keating. She's joining us as Pete's assistant for the rest of the drive. Anyone who forgets his manners answers to me. Understood?" A chorus of yes, boss, and nods answered him, and most of the men returned to their tasks, though a few continued to cast curious glances her way. Ty turned back to Tessa. "Pete will show you the ropes. We move out at dawn tomorrow, so today's your chance to get acquainted with how things work." His eyes met hers, serious now. "Trail life isn't easy, Miss Keating. I won't lie to you about that. But you'll be treated fairly, paid what you're owed, and respected as long as you do your job." "That's all I ask," Tessa said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Ty nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Then welcome aboard." He started to walk away, then turned back. "One more thing, Miss Keating." "Yes," his blue eyes held hers with unexpected warmth. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Sometimes you just need to start with something new and let it grow." With that, he was gone, striding across the camp to where a group of cowboys were working with the horses. Tessa watched him go, feeling as though she'd just stepped off a cliff with no certainty of what waited below. But for the first time in years, what she felt wasn't despair, it was possibility. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity as Pete showed her the workings of the chuck wagon where supplies were stored, how meals were planned, what was expected of her. The old cook was gruff but patient, clearly relieved to have helped despite his initial skepticism. "Breakfast is at dawn," he told her as they prepared the evening meal. "Coffee needs to be ready before that. The boys eat a lot. Hard work gives them appetites like wolves. Dinner's whenever we make camp for the night. Sometimes that's before dark, sometimes after, depending on how the drive's going." Tessa nodded, absorbing everything, determined to prove herself useful. She helped Pete prepare a simple but hearty meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread, working efficiently despite her unfamiliarity with cooking for so many. As the cowboys lined up for their food, each nodded respectfully to Tessa, some murmuring "Madam" or "Miss Keating." A few introduced themselves, but most were reserved, clearly uncertain about having a woman in camp. Ty was one of the last to come for his meal, having waited until all his men were served. "How are you settling in, Miss Keating?" he asked as she filled his plate. "Well enough, I think," Tessa replied, suddenly conscious of how disheveled she must look after hours of work. "Pete's a good teacher." Ty smiled at the old cook. "Best in the business, even if his coffee could strip paint," Pete snorted. "You drink it, don't you?" "Only because I value staying awake more than I value my taste buds." Ty winked at Tessa, and she felt an unexpected warmth bloom in her chest at the casual camaraderie. After the meal, Pete showed Tessa where she would sleep, a small space beneath the chuck wagon, protected from the elements by canvas on 3 sides but offering little privacy. "Best we can do on the trail," he apologized. "Most of the men sleep under the stars, but I figured you'd want some shelter." "It's fine," Tessa assured him, though privately she wondered how she would manage changing clothes or washing in such conditions. As if reading her thoughts, Pete added, "There's a screen we can set up when you need privacy. Not much, but it's something. And the boys know to keep their distance." Tessa thanked him, touched by the consideration despite the rustic arrangements. As Pete hobbled away to his own bedroll, she sat on the ground beneath the wagon, watching the camp settle for the night. Cookfires burned low. Men gathered in small groups talking quietly or playing cards, others already rolled in their blankets sleeping. It was so different from anything she'd known, rougher, certainly, but also somehow more honest than the polite society of Ardmore with its judgments and exclusions. She spotted Ty across the camp, deep in conversation with an older cowboy she'd learned was his segundo, Frank. Even from a distance, she could see the respect with which the men treated him, the easy authority he carried. There was something compelling about him, not just his physical presence, though that was undeniable, but the way he seemed completely at home in this harsh environment. As if sensing her gaze, Ty looked up and across the camp, his eyes finding hers in the gathering darkness. He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that somehow conveyed reassurance. Tessa nodded back, then retreated to the privacy of her makeshift shelter, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. As she lay wrapped in her blanket, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the camp men's voices, horses snorting, the distant lowing of cattle, Tessa realized that for the first time since her father fell ill, she wasn't thinking about what she'd lost. Instead, she was wondering what might lie ahead. Dawn came early, and with it, a flurry of activity. Tessa had barely slept, unused to the hard ground and strange sounds, but she forced herself to rise when Pete banged on the side of the wagon. Her muscles protested as she crawled from her shelter, stiff from the unaccustomed labor of the previous day. "Coffee first," Pete instructed, already stoking the cookfire. "Then biscuits and bacon. The boys need a hot meal before we head out." Tessa nodded, splashing water from the barrel on her face to wake herself fully, then set to work. By the time the camp was stirring, she had coffee brewing and biscuit dough mixed. Pete watched her work with obvious approval, though he offered only a grunt of acknowledgement. The cowboys lined up for breakfast, many looking as tired as Tessa felt, but there was an energy in the camp, a sense of purpose as they prepared to get underway. Ty came by as she was serving, looking fresh despite the early hour. "Sleep well, Miss Keating?" he asked, accepting a tin cup of coffee. Tessa hesitated, then decided honesty was better than pretense. "Not particularly, but I'll adjust," he nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Most do eventually. The first few nights are always the hardest. And does it get easier?" She asked, suddenly needing reassurance that she hadn't made a terrible mistake. Ty considered her question seriously. "Parts of it do. Your body gets used to the work, the rhythm of the days becomes familiar. Other parts stay hard, the dust, the weather, the sheer monotony of miles passing beneath your feet." His blue eyes held her steadily. "But there's something to be said for hard work and clear purpose. It has a way of clearing the mind." Before Tessa could respond, a shout came from across the camp. Ty turned, instantly alert. "Duty calls. Good luck today, Miss Keating." Within an hour, the camp was struck, the chuck wagon loaded, and the massive herd of cattle moving northward. Tessa rode on the wagon seat beside Pete, marveling at the organized chaos of hundreds of longhorns being driven by skilled cowboys. Dust rose in clouds, the noise was tremendous, and the pace, though not fast, was relentlessly forward. "We'll make about 15 miles on a good day," Pete told her as they jolted along. More if the weather's good and the cattle are cooperative, less if we hit trouble. What kind of trouble? Tessa asked, gripping the seat as the wagon hit a rut, storms, river crossings. Stampedes if the cattle get spooked. Indians sometimes, though not so much these days. Mostly it's just the land itself, rough country between here and Kansas. Tessa nodded, taking in the vast expanse of prairie stretching to the horizon. It was beautiful in its way, wild and untamed, but also daunting in its emptiness. She found herself searching the line of riders for Ty's familiar form, spotting him eventually riding alongside the herd, his tall figure distinctive even at a distance. The day passed in a blur of dust and movement. By the time they made camp that evening, Tessa was exhausted, every muscle aching from the constant jostling of the wagon. Still, she worked alongside Pete preparing the evening meal, aware that everyone else had worked just as hard and deserved hot food. As the days passed, a routine emerged. Up before dawn to prepare breakfast, pack the wagon, then travel all day, stopping only when Ty called a halt to make camp. Prepare dinner, clean up, fall into exhausted sleep, and begin again the next day. It was grueling work, but Tessa found herself adapting more quickly than she would have believed possible. Her hands grew calloused, her arms stronger from lifting heavy pots and sacks of supplies. She learned to sleep despite the hardness of the ground and the noise of the camp. More surprising was how the cowboys gradually accepted her presence. At first, they had been wary, uncomfortable with having a woman in camp. But as days turned into a week, then too, their initial reserve gave way to a gruff sort of respect. They thanked her for meals, brought her wildflowers occasionally, and treated her with a courtesy that, while rough-hewn, was genuine. Ty watched it all with quiet approval, stopping by the chuck wagon each evening to check on her progress. Their conversations were brief but increasingly comfortable, and Tessa found herself looking forward to these moments more than she cared to admit. 10 days into the journey, disaster struck. A sudden thunderstorm rolled in from the west, lightning cracking across the sky with terrifying ferocity. The cattle, already nervous from the building tension in the air, began to shift restlessly. "Get the wagon to higher ground," Ty ordered as he rode past, rain already soaking his clothes. "Storm's going to make the creek rise." Pete nodded grimly, guiding the team of horses pulling the chuck wagon toward a slight rise some distance from the creek they'd been following. They had barely reached it when the first bolt of lightning struck nearby, followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder that seemed to split the sky. The cattle panicked. One moment they were a manageable herd, the next they were a stampeding mass of horn and hoof, charging blindly away from the lightning. The cowboys sprang into action, riding hard to turn the leaders, trying desperately to contain the stampede before the cattle scattered across miles of prairie. From their vantage point on the rise, Tessa watched in horror as one cowboy's horse stumbled in the rain-slicked grass, throwing its rider directly into the path of the stampeding cattle. Without thinking, she leaped from the wagon and ran toward the fallen man, ignoring Pete's shout of warning. The rain lashed at her face as she ran, her skirts heavy with mud and water. She reached the cowboy young Billy, she realized just as the first cattle approached. In a desperate move, she grabbed his arms and dragged him toward a nearby outcropping of rock, the only shelter visible. They reached it seconds before the herd thundered past, the sound deafening as hundreds of hooves pounded the earth mere feet away. Pressed against the rocks, holding the semi-conscious Billy close to protect him from the rain, Tessa felt a surge of terror unlike anything she'd experienced. They were completely exposed, protected from the cattle only by the small rock formation, with the storm raging overhead and no way to signal for help. Then, through the curtain of rain, she saw a rider approaching Ty, his face set in grim determination as he fought to control his frightened horse. He dismounted in one fluid motion, tethering the animal to the rocks before crouching beside them. "Are you hurt?" he shouted over the storm, his eyes scanning both of them for injuries. "I'm fine," Tessa called back. "Billy took a bad fall. I think his arm's broken." Ty nodded, checking the young cowboy quickly. "We need to get him back to the wagon. Can you help?" Together, they got Billy onto Ty's horse, Ty mounting behind him to keep him secure. "Take hold of the reins and walk ahead," Ty instructed Tessa. "The horse knows you and won't bolt. Head straight for the wagon, I'll guide you." The journey back seemed endless, the rain blinding, the ground treacherous with mud. Twice Tessa slipped and fell, but each time she got up and continued on, determined not to fail. By the time they reached the chuck wagon, she was shaking with cold and exhaustion, her dress torn and mudded beyond repair. Pete helped them get Billy into the shelter of the wagon, where Tessa could examine his injuries properly. As she feared, his arm was broken, and he had a nasty gash on his head that was bleeding freely. "I need clean water, strips of cloth for bandages, and something to splint his arm," she told Pete, who nodded and began gathering supplies. Turning to Ty, who stood watching with rain dripping from his hat, she added, "And I need you to hold him still while I set the bone." If Ty was surprised by her taking charge, he didn't show it. He simply moved to Billy's side, positioning himself to hold the young man securely. "Where did you learn to tend injuries?" he asked as Tessa prepared what she needed. "My father," she replied, not looking up from her work. "He was in the war, picked up field medicine by necessity." She didn't add that she'd tended her father through his final illness, learning more about sickness and injury than she had ever wanted to know. Setting the bone was a brutal business. Billy, who had regained consciousness, screamed once before mercifully passing out again. Tessa worked quickly, splinting the arm with pieces of wood Pete had found, then bandaging the head wound, which looked worse than it was. "He'll need rest," she told Ty when she had finished. "And someone should watch him through the night in case of fever." Ty nodded, his eyes on her face with an expression she couldn't interpret. "I'll arrange it. You should get dry and warm yourself before you fall ill." Only then did Tessa realize she was still soaking wet and shivering uncontrollably. She looked down at her ruined dress, suddenly aware of how she must appear. "Here," Ty said quietly, shrugging out of his duster. "It's drier than anything else available." He draped it around her shoulders, the unexpected warmth and the faint scent of leather, tobacco, and something uniquely him enveloping her. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "No, Miss Keating," Ty said, his voice low and serious. "Thank you, you saved Billy's life today." "Not many would have risked themselves like that." Tessa shook her head. "I didn't think, I just acted. That's usually when people show their true character." Ty's blue eyes held hers for a long moment before he turned away. "Get some rest. The storm's passing, but we'll stay put tomorrow to let the ground dry and give Billy time to stabilize." Tessa nodded, suddenly too exhausted to speak. She made her way to her shelter beneath the wagon, changed into her remaining dry dress behind the screen Pete had rigged, and collapsed onto her bedroll, still wrapped in Ty's duster. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw again the stampeding cattle, felt again the terror of those moments exposed on the prairie. And beneath that, a newer, stranger feeling, the warmth of Ty's gaze, the comfort of his presence in the midst of chaos. She woke to sunlight filtering through the canvas, surprised to have slept at all. Her body ached from the previous day's exertions, and her hands stung where the rough rope of the horse's reins had cut into her palms. But she was alive, Billy was alive, and the sun was shining. The camp was quieter than usual, many of the men still sleeping after the ordeal of containing the stampede. Pete was already up, coffee brewing over a small fire. "Morning," he grunted as she approached. "You look like you've been trampled by the herd." "Thank you," Tessa replied dryly, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "How's Billy?" "Alive, thanks to you. Got a fever in the night, but Jack sat with him and says it broke toward dawn." Pete eyed her over his cup. "That was a damn fool thing you did, running out there." "Brave, but damn foolish." Tessa didn't disagree. In retrospect, she recognized the recklessness of her actions. I couldn't just watch him die. Pete's weathered face softened slightly. No, I reckon you couldn't. That's why Ty hired you, I expect. What do you mean? The old cook shrugged. Ty's got a knack for reading people. Must have seen something in you worth taking a chance on. Before Tessa could respond, Ty himself appeared, looking tired but composed. Miss Keating, he nodded. How are you feeling? Sore, she admitted, but well enough. How's Billy? Fever broke. He's sleeping now. Ty accepted a cup of coffee from Pete. I've sent riders to check on the herd. We lost some cattle in the stampede, but not as many as I feared. I'm sorry about your duster, Tessa said, suddenly remembering. I'll fetch it. Keep it for now, Ty said, waving away her concern. We're not moving today, but I want you to rest. You've earned it. Tessa started to protest, but Pete cut her off. Don't argue, girl. I can manage one day's cooking by myself. Been doing it for 30 years before you showed up. Reluctantly, Tessa agreed. In truth, she was exhausted, her body demanding rest after the strain of the previous day. She spent most of the morning checking on Billy, who was weak but conscious, his brown eyes filled with gratitude. Miss Keating, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The boys say you pulled me out from under the stampede. I owe you my life. Tessa shook her head, embarrassed by his gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, madam, Billy insisted. They wouldn't. Not for a nobody like me. The simple statement hit Tessa harder than she expected. This boy, barely 18 by the look of him, considered his life of so little value that he was surprised someone would risk themselves for him. It reminded her painfully of her own feelings in those dark days after her father's death, when she had given up on everything, including herself. You're not a nobody, Billy, she said firmly. You're a valued member of this outfit, and don't you forget it. Now rest. That arm needs time to heal. As she left Billy's side, she found Ty watching her from across the camp, a thoughtful expression on his face. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets. You're good with him, he observed. Most of these boys haven't had much kindness in their lives. Nor much value placed on them, it seems, Tessa replied, still troubled by Billy's words. Ty nodded, his eyes on the distant horizon. Many of them come from hard backgrounds. Orphans, runaways, men with pasts they'd rather forget. The trail gives them purpose, a place to belong. For some, it's the first real home they've known. The words struck a chord in Tessa. Purpose, belonging, home. These were things she had lost with her father's death, things she had ceased to hope for in her despair. Is that what it is for you as well? She asked before she could stop herself. A home. Ty was silent for a long moment. It was, he said finally, for a time. But a man can't live his whole life on the move. Eventually, you want something more permanent. Their eyes met briefly, and Tessa felt a curious flutter in her chest. There was something in Ty's gaze, a question perhaps, or a possibility that made her breath catch. Then one of the cowboys called out, breaking the moment, and Ty turned away, called back to his responsibilities. The day passed quietly, the camp recovering from the storm's disruption. By evening, the cowboys were in better spirits, gathered around campfires telling stories and playing cards. Tessa, despite Pete's insistence that she rest, helped prepare a hearty stew that was received with enthusiasm. As the days resumed their rhythm, Tessa found herself watching Ty with new interest. She noticed things she hadn't before: the quiet authority with which he led, the patience he showed with younger cowboys, the respect he commanded without ever raising his voice. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, a flash of loneliness in his eyes that resonated with something deep inside her. Their conversations, once brief and mostly practical, gradually lengthened. Ty would linger by the chuck wagon after meals, talking about the day's progress, the condition of the trail ahead, stories of past drives. Tessa found herself sharing bits of her own life, her childhood in various small towns, as her father sought better opportunities. The brief happiness they'd found before her mother's death, the struggle to keep the store afloat in Ardmore. My father was a dreamer, she told Ty one evening as they sat by the cook fire, the rest of the camp settling for the night. always certain the next town, the next venture would be the one that brought prosperity. He meant well, but dreams don't always feed a family, Ty finished for her, understanding in his voice. Tessa nodded. Yet I can't fault him for trying. He wanted so much for me. He would have been heartbroken to see how things ended. And what about your dreams, Tessa? Ty asked softly, the first time he had used her given name. What do you want for yourself? The question caught her off guard. For so long, her focus had been on survival, on helping her father, on managing the crushing burden of failure. She hadn't allowed herself to dream of more. I don't know, she admitted finally. Once I wanted to teach. I had a teacher who saw something in me, encouraged me to read, to learn. For a time, I thought perhaps I might do the same for others. Ty nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. You'd be good at it. You have patience. Understanding. I've seen how you are with the younger boys in camp. The simple confidence in his assessment warmed her more than the fire. Perhaps, but that was before, everything, before you gave up, Ty asked, his voice gentle but direct. Tessa looked at him sharply. Yes, she admitted after a moment, before I gave up. Ty was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. I know something about giving up, he said finally. About losing everything and wondering if there's any point in starting again. He met her eyes across the fire. There is, Tessa. There always is. How can you be so certain, she asked, needing to understand the conviction in his voice. Because I've lived it. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. I had a wife once and a son, lost them both to fever while I was away on a drive. Came home to find them buried and my world ended. The pain in his voice was old but still raw. I wanted to die. Tried to, in various ways, drink, fights, reckless behavior, but somehow I kept waking up each morning, kept breathing. And eventually, I realized that as long as I was still breathing, there was a chance to find something worth living for again. Tessa felt tears prick her eyes at the quiet honesty of his words. And did you find something worth living for? Ty looked at her, really looked at her, his blue eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't name, but that made her heart race. I'm starting to believe I might, he said softly. The moment hung between them, fragile and profound. Then Pete called from the chuck wagon, needing help with something, and the spell was broken. Ty rose, reluctance evident in his movements. Good night, Tessa, he said, his voice carrying a new warmth. Good night, Ty, she replied, watching him walk away into the darkness. The remaining days of the cattle drive passed with increasing speed, each one bringing them closer to Kansas City and the end of their journey together. Tessa found herself torn between anticipation of reaching their destination and the pay that would give her a chance at a new beginning, and a growing reluctance to see this unexpected chapter of her life close. Her relationship with Ty continued to deepen, their conversations becoming more personal, more meaningful. She learned about his childhood on a small ranch in Texas, his dreams of someday having land of his own again, his quiet faith in the possibility of second chances. In turn, she shared more of herself than she had with anyone since her father's death, her fears, her hopes, her gradual awakening to the possibility that life might still hold joy. The other cowboys noticed the developing connection between their trail boss and the cook's assistant, but if they had opinions, they kept them respectfully to themselves. Pete, however, was less circumspect. He's a good man, Ty Hunter, the old cook told her one morning as they prepared breakfast. Best I've ridden with. He's got his ghosts, but who doesn't? Question is, what are you planning to do about it? Tessa nearly dropped the coffee pot. I'm not planning to do anything about it, we're just friends, Pete snorted. Friends, right, and I'm the Queen of England. He fixed her with a piercing stare. Life's too short for dancing around what you want, girl. I've seen the way you look at him, and the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Tessa felt heat rise in her cheeks. It's complicated, Pete. In a week, we'll reach Kansas City. I'll take my pay and what? Follow him to the next cattle drive, ask him to give up his life for me. Or should I give up any chance at stability to follow the trail? The old cook's face softened. Nobody said love was simple, Tessa. But it's rare enough in this world that when you find it, you'd be a fool to let practicalities stand in the way. Love. The word hung in the air between them, both thrilling and terrifying. Was that what she felt for Ty Hunter? This man she had known for barely 3 weeks, whose life was so different from anything she had known. And even if it was, what future could they possibly have together? These questions occupied Tessa's thoughts in the following days, distracting her from the increasing signs that they were nearing civilization: more farms, better roads, occasional encounters with other travelers. Kansas City was less than 2 days away now, and she still had no answers. The evening before they were due to reach the city, Ty approached her as she was finishing the dinner cleanup. The camp was quieter than usual, the men subdued as they contemplated the end of the drive and the dispersal of the outfit that had been their family for months. "Walk with me?" Ty asked, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty she had never heard before. Tessa nodded, drying her hands on her apron before removing it. They walked in silence away from the camp, following a small stream that meandered through the grassland. The evening was mild, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. "So," Ty said finally, stopping at a spot where the stream widened into a small pool, "tomorrow we reach Kansas City." "Yes," Tessa replied, unsure what else to say. Ty picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water, watching the ripples spread outward. "You'll have your pay, enough to make a fresh start like I promised." "Yes," she said again, her throat suddenly tight. "Thank you for that, for everything." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "What will you do, Tessa? Where will you go?" It was the question she had been avoiding, even in her own thoughts. "I don't know," she admitted. "I could find work in the city, I suppose, or take a train further east, perhaps." "Try for that teaching position I once dreamed of." Ty nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "All good options. You'd make a fine teacher, and you?" she asked, needing to know though afraid of the answer. "Back to Texas for another herd?" "No," he said, surprising her. "This was my last drive." Tessa felt her heart skip. "Your last? But why?" Ty looked away, back toward the water. "I told you once that a man can't live his whole life on the move, that eventually you want something more permanent." He took a deep breath, then met her eyes again. "I bought land, Tessa. A small ranch north of here in Nebraska territory. Good water, good grass, room to grow." "A ranch," Tessa repeated, trying to process this unexpected information. "That's wonderful, your dream." "Part of it," Ty agreed. "But a ranch needs more than land and cattle, it needs a home. A family." He stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "It needs love." Tessa's breath caught as he reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "I know this is sudden," he said, his voice low and earnest. "We've known each other such a short time, but sometimes when you've lost everything, when you've given up hope, life surprises you. It gives you a second chance you never expected." "Ty," Tessa whispered, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "I'm not asking for promises, Tessa, not yet. I'm asking for a chance. Come with me to the ranch, see if it could be a home for you, as I hope it will be for me." His eyes, so blue and honest, held hers. "Start with me and we'll grow together, day by day, season by season, building something that's ours." Tears filled Tessa's eyes, not of sadness but of a joy so unexpected and complete that it left her speechless. This man, this strong, kind, wounded man, was offering her exactly what she had stopped believing was possible. Not just love, but a future. A home. A place to belong. "Yes," she said simply, the word carrying all the hope and promise she had thought lost forever. "Yes, Ty, I'll start with you." His smile, brilliant in the gathering dusk, was worth every hardship she had endured. He pulled her gently into his arms, and when their lips met, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that she had found her way home. The arrival in Kansas City the next day was anticlimactic after the emotional intensity of the previous evening. The cattle were delivered to the stockyards, the men paid, the outfit beginning to disperse to saloons or homeward journeys or new employment. Tessa worked alongside Pete one last time, preparing a final meal for those who remained. "So," the old cook said as they worked, "Nebraska, is it?" Tessa smiled, not surprised that news had traveled so quickly. "Yes, Ty has land there. We're leaving tomorrow," Pete nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. "Good, he needs someone like you, and you need someone like him." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "You'll be missed, girl." Not many can make decent biscuits on the trail. Coming from Pete, it was high praise indeed. Tessa impulsively hugged the old man, who stiffened in surprise before awkwardly patting her back. Now, he muttered, clearly embarrassed but pleased. "None of that, got work to do." Ty approached as they were serving the meal, his face alight with a happiness Tessa had never seen before. "Everything's arranged," he told her quietly. "Train leaves at noon tomorrow. We'll be at the ranch in 3 days." The knowledge that she was truly starting a new life with this man, on his ranch, building something together, filled Tessa with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. But beneath those emotions was a steady certainty that this was right, that Ty Hunter was the reason she had been meant to continue when all seemed lost. They left Kansas City the next day, traveling by train through Missouri and into Nebraska territory. The journey was comfortable compared to the cattle drive, and Tessa found herself marveling at the changing landscape outside the window, the rolling hills giving way to the broader expanses of the Great Plains. Ty watched her with evident pleasure, pointing out landmarks, telling stories of the regions they passed through. His hand found hers often, a reassuring touch that spoke of connection and growing intimacy. They talked for hours, learning more about each other, sharing dreams for the ranch, for their future together. "It's not much yet," Ty warned as they approached their destination on the 3rd day. "Basic cabin, barn, corral, but there's good land, Tessa, room to build." "I don't need much," she assured him, meaning it completely. After the months of despair in Ardmore, the idea of starting fresh with Ty on land they would shape together was more than enough. The ranch, when they finally reached it after a bumpy wagon ride from the nearest town, was indeed modest. A small cabin nestled against a rise, a sturdy barn, a corral where several horses grazed. But the setting was beautiful rolling grassland stretching to distant hills, a creek winding through the property, stands of cottonwood trees offering shade. "Welcome home," Ty said softly as he helped her down from the wagon, his eyes searching hers for her reaction. Tessa looked around, taking in the simple structures, the vast open space, the endless possibilities. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it with all her heart. The cabin interior was rustic but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a curtained-off sleeping area. Ty had clearly prepared for her arrival with fresh bedding, a vase of wildflowers on the table, shelves stocked with provisions. "I know it's not what you're used to," he began, but Tessa silenced him with a gentle touch. "It's ours," she said simply. "That makes it better than any fancy house could ever be." The following days were filled with the work of settling in and making the cabin a home. Tessa used her sewing skills to create curtains from fabric purchased in town, arranged the living space more comfortably, and began a small garden using seeds the storekeeper's wife had given her. Ty worked from dawn till dusk, repairing fences, tending the horses, preparing for the cattle he planned to purchase in the fall. They fell into a rhythm together, working side by side during the days, sharing meals and conversation in the evenings, gradually growing more comfortable with the physical intimacy of their relationship. Ty was unfailingly patient and gentle, never pushing, always attentive to Tessa's comfort and happiness. 2 weeks after their arrival, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in golds and purples, Ty took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, a note of nervousness in his voice that made Tessa smile. This strong, capable man who faced stampedes and storms without flinching, yet grew anxious when speaking from his heart. "About," she prompted gently, "about us. about doing things properly. He turned to face her fully. Tessa Keating, I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you walked into that camp, determined to make a new life despite everything you'd lost. I want to spend my life with you, building this ranch, creating a family, growing old together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple gold band. Will you marry me? Tessa felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Ty Hunter, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the man he was, strong yet gentle, passionate yet respectful. A man who had known loss and found the courage to love again. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with only a handful of witnesses, the pastor and his wife, the storekeeper and his family, and to Tessa's delight, Pete, who had made the journey from Kansas City for the occasion. Couldn't miss this, the old cook said gruffly as he hugged her after the ceremony. Had to make sure he's treating you right. He is, Tessa assured him, her happiness evident in every word, every gesture, better than I ever dreamed possible. The first year on the ranch was one of hard work and adjustment, but also of deepening love and growing connection. Ty purchased a small herd of cattle that autumn, working tirelessly to ensure they survived the winter. Tessa learned the rhythms of ranch life, developing new skills, adapting her existing ones, finding unexpected joy in the challenges. They weathered their first winter together in the snug cabin, huddled by the fire during blizzards, sharing stories and dreams, making plans for spring planting and summer improvements. When the snow finally melted and the prairie erupted in wildflowers, Tessa had news of her own to share. Ty, she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset that had become their daily ritual. I think our family is going to grow sooner than we planned. He turned to her, eyes widening as he understood her meaning. A baby, you're certain? Tessa nodded, suddenly nervous despite knowing how much Ty wanted children. The baby should come in late autumn. I saw Dr. Matthews in town yesterday and he confirmed it. For a moment, Ty was absolutely still. Then a smile broke across his face, so full of joy and wonder that it took Tessa's breath away. He gathered her gently in his arms, mindful of her condition even in his excitement. A child, he whispered against her hair. Our child. Oh, Tessa, what a gift. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Ty built a cradle from cottonwood, his strong hands creating something of beauty and utility. Tessa sewed tiny garments, transformed a corner of their bedroom into a nursery space, and continued to help with ranch work as much as her increasing size allowed. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the golden hues of turning leaves, the ranch showed visible signs of their first year's efforts. The herd had grown, the barn had been expanded, the garden had produced abundantly, and the cabin now truly felt like home, filled with small touches that reflected their life together. Their son, James Thomas Hunter, was born on a clear October night with the help of the midwife from town and Ty's steady presence. As Tessa held their child for the first time, looking down at his perfect face, his father's blue eyes, a wisp of dark hair, she felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. He's beautiful, Ty whispered, sitting beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's cheek. Perfect, like his mother. Tessa leaned against him, exhausted but filled with a joy that transcended physical discomfort. We did it, Ty. We started again. We grew. Ty pressed a kiss to her temple, his eyes suspiciously bright. We've only just begun, my love. There's so much more growing to do. 5 years passed, years filled with the challenges and joys of ranching life and raising a family. The ranch prospered under Ty's careful management, expanding to include more land, more cattle, better buildings. The cabin was now a proper house with multiple bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and the wide porch where they still watched the sunset each evening. Little James Jamie, to everyone, grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's thoughtful nature. And he was no longer an only child. 3-year-old Elizabeth Libby, with her dark curls and infectious laugh, completed their family for now, though both Ty and Tessa hoped for more children in the future. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Ty surprised Tessa with a special gift, a small wooden schoolhouse built at the edge of their property. "For you," he said as he showed her the simple but sturdy structure, furnished with desks, a blackboard, and bookshelves. "And for the children of the neighboring ranches. There are enough families now to need a school, and who better to teach them than you?" Tessa stood in the center of the schoolhouse, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the opportunity it represented. "You remembered," she whispered. "After all this time, you remembered my dream." Ty smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "I remember everything you've ever told me, Tessa Hunter. Every dream, every hope, and as long as I live, I'll do everything in my power to help make them come true." As they walked home hand in hand, their children running ahead, the setting sun painting the prairie in the same golden light that had welcomed them 5 years earlier, Tessa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair in Ardmore when she had given up on everything, to this moment of complete fulfillment, a loving husband, beautiful children, meaningful work, a home filled with joy. "What are you thinking?" Ty asked, noticing her pensive expression. Tessa smiled up at him, her heart full. "I'm thinking about what you said to me that night by the stream when you asked me to come with you. Start with me and we'll grow together. And we have, Ty, we've grown in ways I never could have imagined." Ty stopped, turning to face her as the children continued toward the house. "And we'll keep growing, Tessa. For all the years we have together, we'll keep building, keep learning, keep loving." He cupped her face gently in his hands. "That's the beauty of starting again, the growing never ends." As they stood there in the golden light of sunset, their home and children before them, their love a living, growing thing between them, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the greatest blessings come when you've lost all hope. Sometimes, when you've given up on everything, life sends you a reason to believe again. For her, that reason was Ty Hunter, the cowboy who had seen past her despair to the woman she could become, who had offered her not just love but a future to grow into. And grow they would together for all the days that remained to them.